Hey guys, are you jealous of my bathroom cabinets? Well, of course you are. That's why you clicked on the video. Well, don't worry, because I'm going to show you how you can do your own. And here's how I did it. Whew, now that's a nice planer. What are you guys doing in here? I'm just kidding, I still got my pants on. But thanks for clicking on the video. Today we're actually going to make some really cool cabinet doors for my bathroom here. You can see behind me I got this weird opening behind the toilet. And it would be super nice to have some doors there so I could store my reading materials and some paper for my business. So if you didn't know, I recently redid this bathroom and there was originally doors there. But they were just gross painted plywood and I really didn't like the look of them. So today I'm going to show you how you can make some really awesome cabinet doors. And I'm going to try and throw my own style onto it and make them look really cool. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, there is something we got to do with this. Now, don't mind the flooring in here. This wasn't my pick. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of it either. But when I recently redid this bathroom, I went from paneling to a drywall. And you can kind of see the issue here, is that this drywall was a lot thicker than the paneling. And since we're putting trim up on the side here, we want to make sure that this is even. So to fix that, we're going to have to cut some really thin pieces and add it onto our framing here. That's going to make it so that our trim is going to sit flush on it and there won't be any wobble to it. And it'll just hold up a lot longer. So this is actually pretty thin. I think it's maybe not even 1/8 of an inch. So we're just going to go ahead and cut some strips and then attach them on here. So we got our thin pieces that we're going to connect right here, and as you can see I did them a little too long. The proper way is to go and cut it, but honestly, with these being so thin, it's going to break them. God dang it. How does that happen? I barely took any off. Well, whatever. These don't have to be perfect. So all we're doing is connecting them. I'm just going to be using an 18 gauge nail gun. And then that is going to be more than enough to just hold that on there. When we put the trim on here, we're going to use a lot bigger nails and then that'll get into the meat of this and that's going to hold it all tight together. Oh, the TP. Okay, we got all this framing done, or whatever you want to call it. And beautiful job, by the way. It don't matter, it's gonna get covered up. All we wanted was a flat surface between the drywall here and our box around it where the trim is going to go around. Now that we got that done, we can go ahead and set on the doors and the trim. So I just have this weird obsession of hoarding all different kinds of wood. And my wife really doesn't understand it, but I keep telling her, don't worry, someday I'm going to use this. Well, today is finally that day. As you can see, I just have a crazy amount of pallets. And this is just from years of collecting. But all because you have a lot of it doesn't mean the quality is all that great. As you can kind of see, a lot of these are pretty bowed, and sometimes they get so bad that it's really not usable. But the best way to fix that up is just run one side through your joiner. You can see how it's taken off a fine layer at the bottom there, and then running your plain side against the sidewall on the joiner. Here are some of those really bowed pieces that if I tried to run through the joiner, I wouldn't have really any material left by the time it was flat. So I just went ahead and took the measurements of my cabinets, and then I'm just cutting them down to size, and that really cuts down how much these pieces are bowed. That way you can just joint them down, and then you have a lot more material left. And doing this process makes a heck of a lot of sawdust. And just like you guys, I don't have a fancy shop with all this dust collection. I don't know, maybe someday, hopefully. So I'm stuck with the shop vac, and this wasn't really super important to film, but there's just something really satisfying with sucking up all this stuff. But after that's all done, you can see that we got one side completely flat. But one side is not good enough, so we're going to run all this stuff through the planer, making just as big of a mess as the first time.
So now we got both sides completely flat, along with one of the edges too. Now we just got to fix the last edge, and you do that by just running it through the table saw. And if you watch closely, you can see as I run it through the table saw, you can kind of see how that one edge is so wavy. That's just proving how uneven this was and how important this process is. Because if you want to do a good glue up, you want to make sure that all your pieces are flat, square, and trimmed.
Ugh, covered in sawdust all the time. So now that we got our pallet wood finally processed, I know it's kind of a long process and it's tedious, but you got to do it for pretty much everything you do when you're going to get into this. But now that we got this done, we know that our boards are nice, flat, all the same surface, square, we're pretty good to go. And kind of unfortunately, unless you have a planer, you can't really get this done. Planer's a super awesome tool that you definitely want in your woodworking shop. It really helps you with this, but you probably could do it without a planer. Just the front of your boards are not going to be even and perfectly flat. If you glue them together and then sand the heck out of them, you could get it that way. But the planer just makes it so much easier, and it's going to make it a lot easier just gluing it up later. Not later, we're going to do that right now. So we're just about to glue these front cabinets up together. And what I'm doing here is I do have a lot extra, just because I do want to do the trim around, and I just did a bunch extra because you want to do extra? I don't know. But I am just kind of going through here and looking at the type of pallets I have and kind of just looking for some cool grain. For front cabinets, I want it to look nice and cool. So I like to go through and kind of look at knots. I'm a big fan of these knots and stuff like that. So I'm just picking out pieces that I want to be on my front. You know, if I look at this board, you can see this really cool knot right here. I think stuff like this looks awesome on cabinetry. And even just dark different color tones that come across the board like this. It's really going to make your cabinet look a lot better than just, you know, plain white. I mean, how boring. Get rid of this one. So I measured out an area that I need my two front cabinets to be. You definitely want to put on some extra just so that we can cut it in later and that you don't cut them too small. So I know that I need about 20 inches by 17 inches. So these super long boards I'm going to cut down to 20 inches and then glue them up that way. And that measurement I know I definitely have more than enough. And then I can just cut it down later to the perfect size. Alright, and now I'm just kind of organizing these pallets how I want it, the kind of style. I got some lighter and dark pieces, so I want to mix and match them into something that I kind of like. And I think this looks pretty good. I'm alright with this. I got a sliver. Alright, be right back. Man, if I had a nickel for every one of those I had, I think I'd be a millionaire. Especially with working with stuff like this. But anyways, I think I got the design I want, so we're going to go ahead and clamp this stuff up. But as you can see, since we processed these boards, they all fit together super nicely, so it doesn't really matter where you put them. They'll work really good together. Yeah, so now we're just going to clamp these up. So, put them upright. I like to put them on a little strip of wood right there, that way they won't get glued down to the table when you set them down. I know there's like paper you can put down and stuff for that, but this works enough. God, I think that means I need to lose some weight or something. No more beer. That was a good one. Now when you're gluing together pallet wood, especially stuff like this where you're doing a small space that you're gluing together on a big board, you want to make sure that you're not cranking these too hard, because when you crank these clamps way too hard, you can bend all your boards up because that clamp's going to squeeze it way too tight. So you want to put a lot of pressure on it, but not way too much to where you're actually going to bend the wood. Whoa! And just like that, if you put too much pressure on, that's exactly what happens. And probably the best way to fight against that is to actually take some clamps and then clamp them on every one of your seams. If you couldn't tell, this isn't a professional woodworking shop. I know I'm breaking the internet saying that. But I don't have unlimited clamps like that, I just got what I could afford. So this is going to have to do. And I've done it before, and it works well. Well, just fine. So we got this one clamped up. I'm going to do the next one. This is a portion of the video where I'm out of beer and I need another one. So I'm going to see you guys when this is all dry. So now that we got something to drink, and while we're waiting for that glue to dry,
we're just going to go ahead and put this trim on. So I went ahead and grabbed some of that leftover pallet wood that I processed, and I'm a little constricted by how thick this trim can actually be, just because I do want it to be the same size all the way around. It'd be super weird if it was thin here than thick up here. So that size was 2 inches, so I went ahead and grabbed some boards and then just ripped them down to 2 inches thick, and then I went ahead and cut them up. That's what I got here. Now I'm not going to do your traditional, quarter 45 piece. I'm just going to go ahead and stick this big piece in and then have one go across on top. To be honest, I think this look will look a little bit better. It'll be interesting, I don't know. We'll see. But I'm going to start with my corner pieces here, and then I cut them 2 inches longer than the inside here. That way it can match up with the top and bottom. So all I got to do is bring it down to 2 inches. Make sure this is 2 inches. Right here. And then I stepped up my nail gun game and went to a 16 gauge instead of just the 18. That's nice and tight on that side. Move you over to this side. I want to rest that on my lap. That could be bad. Well, we got our side pieces here, so all we gotta do is measure in the middle. Oh wow, look at that fit. Oh my gosh, it doesn't even wiggle. God. And here I have my pallet wood frame. And if you really wanted to, you could put this frame in so that there was 45s in here. But honestly, I like the look a lot better with it just like this. And a lot easier to do. Alright, so we got all these things glued up. As you can see, they're holding together quite nicely. And all I needed was 2 clamps. I don't need all that other bull crap that all these other people use. Just kind of showing that you don't need a professional woodworking shop in order to make some pretty cool stuff. But now that these are all glued out, we're actually going to cut them down to size. So to cut these down to size, I'm just first using my table saw sled to get rid of one of the uneven corners. I know my sled's at a true 90 degrees, so it's just the perfect tool for cutting off this side. Remember, we did make this oversized by about 1 inch or 2 on both sides. That's so if any mistakes or anything happened, we always had extra to cut off. And that's what we're doing right here, is just cutting off for extra. You gotta measure up whatever you need, and then you just set your table saw up to that. Alright, so now that they're cut down to size, you would think that we would be done, right? Wrong. So as of right now, these things are really super level, they're flat, they're looking really good, but they probably aren't going to stay this way. So over time, wood can still warp and move. And since we have such a thin piece right here, this is definitely not going to stay flat. Over time, these are going to move and warp a little bit. So when you're designing things like this, you want to make sure that you're planning for movement along in the future. So to keep it from warping and moving like that, we're going to put some cross braces in here. So these are just more of these leftover pallets I milled earlier. And by putting this cross piece here, it's really going to help this giant board from ever warping in the future. Okay, so it looks like these are pretty much dry. I'm going to take the clamps off. The only thing extra I'm going to do this is I'm going to rub this down with some mineral oil. And I figured you guys didn't want to watch me rub anything down with oil, so here it is after I oiled it. And of course you can just see how much that mineral oil really brings out the grain. But next we got to install this hardware. I'm just going to start off by measuring out where I want these handles and just drilling in some guide holes for them and just screwing them in from the back. There's nothing fancy about these ones. These are just super cheap handles. I use a lot of them for my dressers. But here are the hinges I'm using. I'm sure you've seen them before. They're the long black triangle ones. They're really cool looking, and I thought this would be awesome to put on my cabinet. So the first thing I did is just measure the side of my board and then divide it by 3 so I could evenly space out these hinges. And then once I put one on, I realized, what am I doing? This one to the right is them evenly spaced out, and yeah, that looks horrible. So what I ended up doing, I think I went 2.5 inches from the top and 2.5 inches from the bottom. Don't have these things spaced out because they look horrible. Don't do that. Instead, just go a couple inches from the top and the bottom. Okay, so we do have all of our hardware installed on the cabinet doors, and now it's just time to install it. And the best way to line this up is to actually go and grab a handful of pennies. You can use pennies or shims or, I don't know, anything small and thin that you can use. Pennies normally just work best because everyone's got a handful of pennies at home. And what we're doing, if you can see, we're putting all the pennies on the bottom. That's because when we set the door, we're going to set the door on top of the pennies, and that way it's not directly on top of our trim.
We're doing that so that when we install it and the doors go in and out, it's not going to be sliding onto that trim every time. There's going to be a very tiny gap on the bottom of that door. And you want that because otherwise it's going to make creaky noises and it's going to get damaged. So a penny is just a nice thin amount. They're all the same. It's just easy to use. So I'm going to throw this up on top of the pennies. Ooh, look at that fit. See if this one fits too. Oh, you know what? Gotta grab my drill out of there. That was almost bad. And setting it on top of the pennies. Here we go. So now, gotta be careful so it doesn't fall over in the middle of this. I'm gonna screw them in. So, I mean, guys, this is great. I really, really like the look of these. I love these hinges on here. But the one problem we do have is that when you go to close it, it doesn't stop. So my plan was to take the old hardware I had off the original doors and put it on here. I seem to have misplaced it. So maybe in the future I'll buy a stopper where there's like a magnet where you can close it and it'll click. But for right now, honestly, all I'm going to do, and I'm going to bring it in a little bit closer here. Here's about the middle point where the two doors come. I got this tiny piece of wood. Honestly, all that I'm just going to do... Oh my gosh, this glue bottle. Honestly, all I'm going to do is just glue this real quick. Right on the edge right here. Probably a little bit too big, but I can always cut it down later. And I'm going to let this dry, but when that dries, that's going to create a stopper so that this doesn't go any farther than just this. But honestly, that's great. That looks good to me. But here you go, guys. I mean, these doors were super easy. Gosh, I hit it again. But yeah, these doors were super easy. They were a lot of fun, and I gotta tell you, man, I really, really like the look of this. And again, besides the hinges, completely free. I mean, pallet wood's all over the place. You can go and get it anywhere. And yeah, you can make some really cool stuff with it. So guys, this is where the end of the video is. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did because, man, I'm really happy with this. I really think it does look good. So I'm gonna go ahead and see you on the next project. Have a good one, guys. Ah, my beer's in here yet. Ah, here it is. Whew.